Hello, everyone. Are you awake? Yes, no. Great, mixed results. I'm going to talk to you about designing for privacy in mobile and web applications. It's a rousing topic that will definitely wake you up. So let's talk about the present day. What is privacy? There are many different definitions of privacy. I like to think of it like the ability to have control over where your content goes and who it's accessed by. But there are better definitions that we can also look at because nothing has a static definition anymore. Anything can change at any time, and we can always be surprised. So perhaps the ability to choose what content you share, view, and access without being tracked. That might be a good one too. Or privacy is the ability not to be surprised. I like that one the best because if you make a website or a mobile app or some piece of software and suddenly your users get a surprise, which will probably be on the front page of Hacker News or on the New York Times, you've done something wrong. And there are a variety of things that you can do. You can say, I'm really sorry, or you can prevent it from happening in the first place by building your system well. But the thing is, most people, if they make something great, they will, or rather, used by a lot of people, not necessarily great, will probably get hacked or have their data leak out in some way. So how you handle that is also very important. And what I want to go through in this talk is how to handle things and how to build things in these situations. Of course, this is never going to be complete, but it's important to think about. So this was this one guy's surprise. He woke up in the morning and suddenly there was this Gmail glitch that sent thousands of emails to his Hotmail account, and he couldn't actually click open any of the emails because they were coming in at like 100,000 a second or something ridiculous. And of course, these things happen. The world is not perfect. We think that we build more technology and it will solve all of our problems, but we'll just have increasingly weird glitches like this. Privacy can also be just a feeling or just a perception of security. And the weird thing about this idea of security is that it can be completely and totally designed. This is an example. So there was this bus company, and they said, well, it'll cost $100,000 to put security cameras in all of the buses. So what if we just put security cameras in 1 in 6 buses, and we just made it look like there was a security camera in every bus? Bullying on those buses, these school buses, went down because people thought they were being surveilled, even though they weren't in most cases. And so just the idea that they were being watched is more like Foucault and panopticon type stuff. But the idea that somebody could be being watched at any moment changed their behavior. I also met somebody who was a security guy for Second Life, if any of you remember Second Life. And I told him, I said, well, what are your weirdest stories about security? And he said, well, we had these users that came in and they built these elaborate, beautiful banks with like marble columns and all of these things in virtual space, and they had a sign that said open for business. People would go in, deposit their real life money into these banks, and then the people just close up shop and take it away. And so the security guy asked all the users, why did you put your money in this bank? It's fake, it's virtual. I said, well, it looked secure. Look at the marble columns. Like, you can build this for free. Like, you don't have to actually have any money to build a virtual bank that looks like it's safe and secure. And so the idea that any of these things can be designed or hacked is really important to look at. And a lot of times people will say, well, it looks nice, therefore it must be secure. In a lot of cases, that's absolutely untrue. So privacy on the web. In the old web, you didn't have all these social silos, so you could go anywhere and you didn't necessarily be tracked. In the new web, you're logged into one or all of these network platforms, and they're tracking everywhere you go for ad purposes. And of course, if you do anything weird, then it could be used against you in the court of law for political issues. We won't go into that too much. It's too depressing. One of my friends said that we invest much of our lives into these virtual condos that anybody can walk into and do what they like. So basically, it's not that we're really owning our data anymore or even owning our presence online. It's not that we should have the right to be anonymous. We should have the right to have multiple identities and change them at will. I kind of think about the idea that if you have like a house and you're sitting there and then like one day, like whenever these companies are like, hey, we're going to change all of your the look and feel of the site. we'll give you a 2-week trial and then it'll be permanent. That's like somebody going into your house and being like, I'm going to change all the cupboards around. You don't know where I'm going to put the cupboards or any of your belongings. And then one day you're going to get home, they're going to be completely changed. You might not be able to get into like the pantry anymore because we forgot to implement that. And then you have to file a bug report. This is how we're really dependent on these things. And now we have these issues in which they get changed without our control. So we're all living on this kind of borrowed space at this point in time. We don't really necessarily own it. And then we have all these changing user interfaces. The minute you get used to one, it can change. The issue that I found is my mom, she was using Gmail, and everything had a label that she could read. And then it changed to Pictocons, but they weren't really great Pictocons. They were just kind of like some random Pictocons, and she had no idea what anything did anymore, and she was panicking. I said, is there a way for me to just like say, let's freeze this user interface and just keep it? There's a reason why there are still 20 million people using AOL. It's like once people learn a thing, they don't want to have the bandwidth to constantly update and change things. If we talk about technology being really great and stable, why do we still have to buy like a new phone every 6 months because the battery runs out? So how can we design for privacy? There's a temporary solution, which is simply privacy by design. And then the longer term solution is probably going to be data ownership. And this, of course, hasn't been solved yet, so I'll talk about what could happen in the future. So privacy by design. Let's look at an example of smartphone cameras. So maybe 15 years ago, we had all these feature phones, and you could play Snake on them, and they had 3 or 4 days of battery life, and it was pretty great. And then also you could make phone calls, and you could do T9 texting on the keyboard. And then all of a sudden, some phones started to have cameras in them. And if you read the news articles, it was privacy is dead, everybody's going to take photos in dressing rooms and in locker rooms, and we have to ban these devices, and the privacy is gone, and it's the end of everything. And now, 15 years later, almost all of you have a camera in your pocket. And it's totally the norm, because what we've learned over time, as we've gotten used to these things, is when you hold your phone up like this, you're taking a photo, and there's enough time for somebody to run away if they want to. Or usually you'll just be in the back of somebody's photo of 1 in 10,000 photos that are on their phone that they'll never do anything with, but they just like taking photos of everything in order to like save that memory outside of themselves instead of actually being in it. Or you just see people taking photos of their breakfast or lunch or dinner. So a lot of food pictures, not a lot of pictures that are invading somebody's privacy. Although in some countries like Japan, there have been issues with privacy, and the solution there was just to make a really loud shutter sound that you can't turn off. So on Japanese cameras, you can't turn off, on the iPhone, you can't turn off the shutter noise. It makes a shutter sound. So if you're trying to take a picture of somebody on a subway, it'll make a shutter sound and everybody will know. Now, what happened? What happened here? So let's go back to smartphone cameras for a minute. Smartphone cameras, most people had cell phones. Then there were a few people that had cell phone cameras. Then many people had cell phone cameras. And it got absorbed into our humanity. I think of humans have a metabolism rate for technology. We can't absorb like 20 features. It takes like a year or 2 to absorb each feature. Like when the iPhone came out, it was like, what is this? This is hilarious, this is dumb. And then like a year later, some people had it. And then a year later, we had the concept of apps that you could actually build them instead of just use them. And then we had the concept of like Bluetooth on it and location services. And like each year we got like a little bit more, because the thing about Apple is that they knew that it's gonna take 10 years to make it cheap enough to put all these devices in the phone, first off. It's also going to take us 10 years to accept and understand and absorb these features. And so the problem is when you take something like a smartphone camera that like evolves on something that was originally a landline telephone that was tethered to a room, that then became cordless, that then became portable in your pocket, that then started to absorb all of the other stuff in your pocket, like cameras. We had this long, continuous trend. But when you had something like this, there was no continuous trend from which it came. And the issue is that they said, well, we'll just have a device that's $1,500. You have to be a developer and sign up for our program. Only a few people are going to have it. It's super secret. And it has how many different features? It has, like audio, and it has video, and it has video recording and photography. We took away that little record light so no one knows whether it's recording or not. Like, people can't even handle that jump. And then it has text messaging, and then it has, and not to mention that if you were to record with it, it would have 15 minutes of battery life. Nobody's going to report on that. When you throw so many features at somebody, the news is going to focus on the thing that terrifies them most, the thing that's uncertain. And so they had no chance. But given this over 10 years, starting with the idea that like you could wear this in your car for better directions, or just have an audio thing to like listen to something, or this could be like a portable camera like Snap that does one thing and one thing only and kind of looks cool and isn't $1,500, they missed out. So the difference was all this design and product launch, the secrecy, the closed system, and the price. And because of that, there wasn't any play, it was confusion, there was this kind of pseudo-elite status and a bunch of fear and speculation. And the thing about play is that it's incredibly important. If you think about the iPhone when it came out, it was really expensive, it was like $600, and people beta tested it, and they paid a lot of money for it. And then the next version came out, and you could do apps, but they let developers build the apps beforehand, and it was a real clunky, horrible interface. But I think the most successful app that came out from that time period was the Fart app. Like, when I saw that Fart app come out, I was like, the iPhone's gonna be just fine. Because it shows that like as a 13 or 14-year-old, all you have to do is include two libraries, the push library and the audio library, and then like put an image of a button. And suddenly you've absorbed a physical object like a whoopee cushion with like, 20 lines of code? That's incredible. Like, and then that was, oh, this is really funny, it's a fart app, ha 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 ha. What were people making for Google Glass? Oh no, you blink and it'll take a picture. Scary apps, right? So the idea that people could play with this and that like the 13-year-old could then go on GitHub, GitHub didn't really exist. They could go online and they could say, here's my code sample in a zip file, and like talk on a forum and say, I built this thing really quick, and now it makes me like $50,000 a year. Like, people, wow, this is really cool. Let's also make really dumb apps. Including the one called I Am Rich. It sold 8 copies, and it was $8,000. It's a fantastic app. It just says I am rich and has like a purple like emerald type thing on the, anyway. But people were able to play with it, and that was really, really important. And when a product took itself so seriously, it just became like fragile and just broke. I also wore Google Glass around just to see what people said. They said, are you recording me right now? Because again, if you take out that record button and you don't understand the social situation in which you're entering something into, it will fail. And people thought I was recording them all the time, which of course I wasn't, because battery life is so bad on that thing. I would have had to bring around like a big, like a car battery with me to keep it on all day. So the iPhone developer launch, you just paid $99. You had access to developer tools. They said, keep quiet about it. Don't let anybody know that you're making these things until the launch. And most people had phones already, so they knew what it was. But did people have heads-up displays already? Other than those like little Bluetooth headsets that are really annoying and great for general contractors and like really annoying executives, people didn't really have them. And so, of course, you could have predicted that it would fail, but there was so much hype that it was hard to get through that. This is a graph of the norms over time. So the norms change. Right now, what is normal is completely invisible. The fact that we all have phones is really mundane. If you were to look 15 years ago, the idea that we all have phones and can do video chat would be absolutely ridiculous and exciting and cool, that we can do this on our phones. But that norm changes. So anything below that norm line, all these restorative technologies, like eyeglasses or prosthetic legs, those are kind of weird looking, but they're totally accepted. Even decorative, like you can have decorative glasses, and that's kind of fashion accessory, even though it's a restorative technology. I have contact lenses, so I'm invisibly restorative. Then anything above that norm line that's not evenly distributed is enhancing technology, and that stuff is usually scary because it enhances you above the norm. So usually that's military technology, or like if I had like a heat-seeking sunglasses where I could like see heat signatures of everybody, that would be terrifying, right? Because that would be like Terminator-like. But in 10 years, we might all have that God forbid. And then that would be the norm, right? And so then you could tell whether people were nervous or not. I don't know why you would need this technology. But that's the fear. And so if you can look at when you're entering a product into a social space, where is it entering? What are the norms? And how do you change those norms over time and work with people to embrace those things so that they can accept the product over time and not just panic and think it's horrendous. And part of that is the privacy, part of that is the notification systems, part of that is putting a freaking red light if you're recording somebody through a heads-up display. I mean, come on, this is pretty standard stuff. So I tried to calm down the device by putting it as a headband on my head. It was like taking a hat off when you go into a restaurant. I felt like very 1850s, like, I'm gonna take my hat off when I go into the restaurant. Instead, I would like headband it. And that definitely calmed people down because it was showing them that like it wasn't on my face. I ended up doing that so much that I didn't use the device anymore, and so I stopped using it. So half of privacy is just perceived. In the case of Google Glass, the perception was that there was no privacy at all, even though the device wasn't recording all of the time. It's completely socially created. It's attached to behavioral norms, the standards that we have at a given point in time. And behavior can change when norms change. If you look at the very first ad for Coca-Cola, it taught you how to drink a Coca-Cola. It was like 1.5 minutes long. It was like a family of 4, and it was like a hot afternoon, and then the narration would be like, it's a very hot afternoon. Try the refreshing taste of Coca-Cola. It would describe the bubbles as they went down your throat, like because this was a new thing, like very, very important. And when and where and like how to open the bottle and like what it sounded like when you like opened the cap. And now we don't need that anymore. But like these are these like very simple training things that you kind of have to enter people into. When elevators first came out, a lot of people in New York, they had these like crazy skyscrapers, and these elevators were coming out and they were too fast and people's eardrums hurt, and so they had to artificially slow down the elevator. And this is the important point, is that it's not that technology is not ready for humans. Humans are generally not ready for the technology. We've had all this stuff for years. We just have to enter it smoothly into society. People aren't usually ready for these things. And when they are, we need to design them well so that it's okay for them to use them. It was the same with trains. Like when trains first came out, nobody had been accelerated that fast as a human being. And so there were all these people that like, are people going to die if they're accelerated that quickly? Like this is far faster than a horse. Like this is terrifying. And there was this like fear, and there were all these intrepid people that were like, well, I'm gonna go on a train, and if I die, then it'll be for science. And of course we didn't die on the trains. And it definitely shrank the world, but there's these new things that happen, and you can laugh at it, but like we will in 20 years laugh at what we were dealing with right now, hopefully, instead of. So part 3, how do you build privacy into mobile and web apps? This is the boring structured part of the talk. 1, get a privacy policy. A privacy policy is not just a piece of text and legalese. It's a regret management tool. This has changed a lot. It's not 30% of mobile app developers anymore. But there are more people that have it, but there's ways to structure it. You can have one section that's legalese and one plain English section. Because if you understand your privacy policy well enough, you can write it in plain English. Like you should understand it well enough that you can write it as well. Regret management tool. Okay, minimum viable privacy policy. Who you are so that people can contact you, the categories of personal data that the app wants to collect, whether that's photos or contacts, the purpose of it, why the data processing is necessary. We would like to have access to your photos for the purpose of adding smiley faces to them and filters so that you can post them to the web and get likes on social media. Whether the data will be disclosed to which third parties, not just the third parties, but which ones, and then the data withdrawal rights and account deletion policy. If you delete your account, how long will it take to remove that data from our servers? 15 days, 10 days, whatever, and then can you withdraw your data at any time? And the issue is like if you tell your developers, hey, we need to have this like new policy where we need to take all the data off the servers, they'll groan at you. And they'll say, well, we already implemented this and we have to redo the whole thing. But if you do it early enough, then you can work with them and make it easier for them to do because it'll just be really annoying for them. Simplify and consolidate. So this is the 2 sections. If you consolidate your text and make it easy to understand, it'll be easy to change, and it will also be easy to tell people on social media or in an email, hey, we're going to change the privacy policy, but here's a draft that you can look at before it's changed. Medium used to do this. I think I gave a speech at their headquarters and they changed it, but for a while, because I was so mad, they reserve the right to use your name and content for any purpose forever, even if they get acquired in the future. So basically, if Medium gets acquired by, I don't know, timemagazine.com, they could just repost all the stuff through Time. They don't have to pay anybody. I was like, no. Wikia, I don't think changed. Communities on Wikia, which is like the personal fan wiki software, they don't really, and I don't know if this has been changed, but they don't own their content and they can't transfer it off the site. The whole point is you have your fan base on Wikia, and then there's a bunch of ads that show up, and that's how they make their revenue, unlike Wikipedia and the Wikimedia Foundation, which runs on donations. So it's a for-profit wiki. And so there's a lot of people that I've known in the wiki community that have tried to take their stuff off the site, and they're like, no, you can't export all this data and host it on another site. It's owned by us. And they got really freaked out after like making something for 3 or 4 years. You know, Harry Potter fan wiki, like this is a lot of content and a lot of people spending their free time to create something. So hopefully this has changed. But there are a lot of times in which a site comes out, you don't read the terms of service, and then you get stuck. How many of you have read the entire iTunes privacy policy? I was the type of kid that would like cut open the cereal box and read the sweepstakes rules, and if they didn't have the limits to a household, I would like generate them in a printer and like get a lot of prizes. So I like reading these things, but I'm really weird. But the thing is, like, if you write it well enough, you don't need to have this crazy policy. What about Creative Commons? Everybody knows about Creative Commons. This was fantastic because this was an answer to this. This came out of the Berkman Klein Center of Internet Society at Harvard University. Yay! It's like one of the reasons I was like, I have to join this place. They made Creative Commons. But it's great because it allows you to just apply something and then have this very simple thing, which is like, you are free to share and adapt. It's nice. It would be nice if more legal stuff was this way. It doesn't need to be overly complicated, and neither does your privacy policy. It's really straightforward. Allow people to access and export their data. If you're a startup, chances are you'll probably fail at some point, or you'll get acquired, or you'll get merged, or you'll get acquired, or you'll IPO, God forbid, that would be horrible. And then you'll have to answer to a bunch of people who don't know anything about your app and yet have their money in it. Sorry, I don't like IPOs. But if you allow people to access and export their data, then when your site goes down or changes hands, at least people will be able to run their data off the site. So GeoCities had the issue where Jason Scott had to go in and like archive all of the GeoCities sites. If you remember, there was one that was really bad, AOL home sites. So AOL home sites, a lot of people were using it for like memorial sites for like deceased children and like all of these like really personal sites. And they had these sites on for like 3-4 years. And then AOL home sites put a note on their front page. They didn't email anybody. They put a note on the front page and they said, AOL home sites is shutting down. No email. You have 2 weeks to remove your content. Of course, nobody got the note, and they didn't even know how to archive their content. It wasn't, here's your website as a zip file delivered to you, or whatever. It just dropped. And so then they had a comment box, which is ridiculous. So 2 weeks later, what happens? But like all of these like mothers and fathers and kids are like, my site is gone, my memorial for my brother. Those are the only pictures I have of him. This is horrible. And then one of the guys said like, what a shambles and a poor show. Thankfully, I moved my site to GeoCities. It's like, no, it's gonna die again. So what people have learned is that people are mad if you just delete their data without telling them, number one. And two, if you make it easy to export and like host elsewhere, it works out pretty well. But it's hard to do. And another issue is that oftentimes an acquiring company will say, if we buy your data and you don't allow it to be exported, then we'll pay you more money. So some people will get like an extra $20 million in an acquisition if they don't allow the data to be exported. That's kind of not great. So there's an incentive not to allow people to export their data in a lot of these times. So privacy by design versus privacy by disaster. If you consider privacy in every aspect, whether that's web or legal or messaging, then things will be okay. But if you don't, you say, well, we'll just put a privacy policy here, but we won't implement it on the back end, then it will be awful later. If you're successful. If you're not, don't worry about it. Nobody will hack into your stuff. I'm kidding. They will. If you consolidate and simplify settings and permissions, it works out pretty well. So this was an old app that I built called Geoloki. It allowed you to share your location for a set period of time, and then it would expire, and you could see somebody in real time. But what we did is we just had an on-off location button, and then it would share or not. And they were really simple settings. And people liked it because it was like a privacy-first location sharing app. Like, it was just sharing this high-resolution data, but you were able to turn it off and on at any time. We had a very clear privacy policy about it. And so even though you were sharing like the most personal data ever, people were really comfortable using it. Contextual privacy. This is a very old screenshot of Instagram when they first started doing this. But what they said was, when you share a photo, it will allow you to have these sharings and permissions right when you post it. So instead of like having an app when you download it say, a kind of binary of, this app wants to use your location, this app wants to use your context, this app wants to use your camera. Only when the app needs to use that thing should it ask permission for it, and it should tell you, this app wants to use your photos for the purpose of whatever you need it for, so that people know, if they're using their context for a certain thing, instead of let's just ask for permission and have all the permissions set up in the beginning, which is really annoying. But every time somebody wants to do more that way, you can have people that are using an app just fine without having to click all of those buttons in the beginning and just allow wide access to everything without knowing why it's being used. And of course, nobody is perfect. It's a privilege, not a right. And if you make a mistake, you should have a boilerplate apology letter ready, because you should expect something bad to happen. And if it does happen, apologize immediately, try to figure out what to do, and try to make it right. We saw what happened with Uber lately. Like, they just had thing after thing after thing happen, and then finally the CEO apologized for this one little minor detail. People are really mad, right? Because he wasn't just let's apologize profusely for things and change things. It was, let's do this one little tiny thing about anyway, it wasn't the way to do it. And then somebody hacked into their financials and found out that they lose a lot of money, and it's going to be interesting to watch. By the way, if you apologize, people will like you more, just to let you know. Authentication and permissions. So I created this mock-up a long time ago that allowed you temporary authentication. So this was more for location-based stuff, but the idea is here's a grocery app. It's going to remind you to pick up eggs at the store, right? But you can type in the geofences in which you want your location to be shared. So the data will not, your location won't be shared to the app all the time, only at these specific places for the specific purpose. So if it's New Seasons or Walgreens or Whole Foods, it could be Walgreens anywhere in the United States. It could be New Seasons in just Portland, Oregon, Whole Foods in just Portland, Oregon. And that way it's only grabbing my location when I'm at those stores. It's not storing any of that location data if I'm not at those stores, and I know what it's being used for. So the issue is that we often have these kind of black and white sharing options, but they're not granular. And the world is not this or that, true or false. It's more quantum. There's just a lot more going on. And so if we have these things more granular, you can ask for a lot more user data, protect that user data, do a lot more in terms of functionality, and it's really exciting. A lot of people aren't trained to do this yet because they're just trying to get their apps out really fast. When in doubt, give control. Google now does this exact thing in the exact format. But the great thing about it is that you could look at, for instance, your location history, and you could be here's all the places I went. I can click and label them if I want. I can delete them. I can say never store my data at this location. And so you can actually see what data has been captured by the application. Now, this is a little hard because then you're going to have to work with your software developers and say, we need to have a user experience for the data that's being gathered by our application, and have controls over it. But doing this really helps people out. It makes them feel comfortable with sharing all that data, especially if they can delete it. There's a tracking software that I use called Eyebrows. It's a pet project out of MIT's computer science department, and it tracks every single site that you go to, and then it publishes it on a web page. And so I tried this out, and I was but you can block domains, and when you're on a page, you can say don't publish. And so I tried this just to see, and it's terrifying, but the granularity of the controls that it gives me makes me comfortable with having something that records everything I do online, especially if I can start to block the sites, because I want that history, and it's really hard to get and export normally. Community involvement. If you propose updates, and you let people comment on them far ahead of time, you will have far less issues. It's kind of like if you're writing a book and you do a pre-release and then people will read it and show you horrible, glaring things that thankfully you can fix before it went to print. It's the exact same thing. Like, people will show you the horrible, glaring things that you've done, hopefully, if they care enough, before it becomes permanent. So it's really important to just give people a preview. And then be clever. If you have too many moving parts, things will break. So if you can do things with the least amount of moves and the least amount of buttons, it will be easier for people to use. It will be easier for people to understand. All right, that's the end of that section. Now you know 10 things to do. Now I want to talk about the future of privacy and data ownership. One of the issues we have right now is that we have these Internet of Things devices, and you have to connect them to the web, and they can fail. So has anybody heard of the PetNet issue? So PetNet is this feeder for cats and dogs. You can Skype and see your cat and dog remotely, and then it'll have the feeder on a timer so that they can eat. So all these people bought this feeding app, and they didn't really know. They said, well, this is great. Like, I can leave my pet alone. I don't have to give somebody an extra key. So they installed everything, set it up, hooked it up to their Wi-Fi, and because it requires a network to do the Skype, and it turns out that it required the network to do the feeding. It didn't do that offline. And so what happened? Well, their servers went down, and all these cats and dogs were stuck without food. And people were uncertain. They were like, this is like the new Schrodinger's cat. Like, they're like, I don't know whether my cat is alive or dead, and I can't see it, you know? And so there were these issues, and then I looked at the terms of service on the PetNet site, and it said, we're not responsible for downtime, i.e., we're not responsible for the death of your dog or cat because our website went down. And they also didn't implement the offline feeding routine. So if the web went down, your cat or dog wouldn't get the timing, like the timed feedings. And this is an issue because this could have happened with people, right? If we got so reliant on, like, hey, let's have this smoke detector that's connected to Wi-Fi and only works over Wi-Fi, and then the house burns down, oh, sorry, the network was down, and now we're not responsible for people dying in your house at home because of a fire because our network went down. I mean, come on, really? Seriously? Like, there needs to be a little bit of consumer protection here. And the other issue is that if you have a bunch of Internet of Things devices, they're all using up a ton of bandwidth in your house. And so, like, when you're trying to stream Game of Thrones, like, you're competing with the Internet of Things devices, sending a bunch of useless updates. And I really don't want to go home and turn on the lights in my house and have it to go all the way through the web and back in order to turn on and off the lights. I was consulting for this audio company, and they're like, we're going to make speakers, and when you turn the volume button up or down, it'll go through the web to turn up the volume and down the volume. I was like, are you kidding me? So if you're in a rural situation, if you got a really crappy modem, like, you'll have a delay of like 5 seconds because the server is busy and you can't get the packets up, and then it just made me so mad. And I was like, so you're from San Francisco where like everything is a utopian perfect Wi-Fi signal? Not. It's never a utopian Wi-Fi signal. We didn't build into our infrastructure Wi-Fi and connectivity like we did electricity. We're in a place with electricity right now, and we expect this to be okay. We expect it to be stable. It's not flickering and going off and on. You don't have to use a password to get into the electricity. Could you imagine? And then suddenly the electricity will go, oh, sorry, well, the electricity is spotty. You should be accustomed to that. And all of your apps run on it. So like your dishwasher's gonna go down, and so is your stove, right in the middle of it, and your lights will go out, and then maybe your water will go out because that's connected to electricity too. It's a new electrified watering system. It's cool, it's connected. This is stupid. Like, and now everybody expects to be able to have all these Internet of Things connected. Are you kidding? Like, we can't rely on them like we do electricity. We didn't have the electrification effort in the 1930s to the 1950s where we had like General Electric come in and electrify everything, and like all these people on farms like connect to a larger grid. Like, we don't have that. We don't care about connectivity. I mean, except for like some places like South Korea, which is like connectivity is the best and it's amazing. They even have issues with it. So the idea that we're expecting to like have our systems rely on this, and the idea that we're not writing in assembly code, we're writing in like some crazy abstracted language that requires like these giant packet sizes to like do anything, is horrible. It means that we'll have way more hacking issues, we'll have way more bandwidth constraints. We need to be making like the tiniest thing possible to get the job done. And if you start to think about what in your house needs to work locally, then you can start to make stuff that works really well. Something should work without having to be on the web, right? And when it does go to the web, it should send the smallest amount of data so that it doesn't interrupt all your bandwidth. I mean, we only have, what, like 3 options for web? We have like Comcast and like CenturyLink, which are pretty much the same thing, and like some random thing. So this is like my perception of what is happening here. So first we had computers that were far away, mainframes. So you have people like Bill Gates that would like sneak out of their house at 3 in the morning to get their mainframe time at the University of Washington or whatever, from like 3 to 5 a.m. And then many people to one computer, right? And then we had workstations, then we had personal computers and desktops, which were great. It was like a few people to one computer. If you wanted software, you get a CD-ROM. That CD-ROM would last you like a year or 2. Everything was local. You had to finish the software because you couldn't just take back the CD-ROM and be like, oops, except for Service Pack 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then we had the remote mainframe. I call them remote mainframes, but the idea of the cloud, now all of our data is stored away from us again. How many of you go up to Oregon to hang out with your Facebook photos that are like stored in the gorge? Like, you know, they won't even let you in the facility, but my photos in there, they're my photos. No, you can't go into the facility. What the heck? It's my data. Shouldn't I be allowed in the facility? No, you can't be allowed in the, what? Why is it stored over here? Why isn't it stored on my device? Why isn't it stored with me? So what I'd like to see in the future, and maybe we'll get forced in this and maybe we'll get delayed, is the idea of a personal server. We have so much power on our phone that shouldn't we be having our data with us first and then share it to a third party for a temporary period of time? Like if I go and get my eyes done at an optical place, shouldn't I be getting that prescription data? And shouldn't I be able to like send that to somebody and allow them to use it for the next 24 hours for the purpose of diagnosing a disease or giving me some prescription lenses, so that when their database gets hacked, only the people who have shared that information in the last 24 hours actually get that out? That would be really nice, right? But we may or may not see that in the future. If we flip the whole thing around and say, well, we should own our data, like your house deed is owned by you, it's not stored on a server somewhere, there's a document, then we might have less issues with privacy and security. Right now, we have a giant amount of Titanics waiting to happen. Hopefully people won't die in the process. The good thing about the Titanic is that it set standards for radio and SOS, because there wasn't any primary communication channels. Like, well, anybody can speak on radio. And so somebody just interrupted them on radio during their like, hey, we need help signal. And they said, oh, well, they're fine. You know, we're going to talk on the radio now. It's like, there's no priority channel. And right now on the web, there's no priority channel either, which net neutrality, right? So it's not like we need one, but there aren't a lot of options for emergencies. So if you start processing as much possible on the device itself, you start to get a different kind of reality. And if you do that as a mobile application developer, it makes a lot more sense because you can have something work really well when somebody's on public transit. They don't have to be always connected to get the benefit out of your app. It's a little bit harder to do, but you end up having a better experience if you can download everything possible. The web right now has made it so that it's easier to consume versus create. And I think a lot of that means that we've lost a lot of our creativity. I mean, how many of you learned to make websites through like Neopets, MySpace, NeoCities, any of these weird websites, right? Like a lot of us learn from these playful areas. And right now the web is like, if you want to make a website, it will look like this. It will run on Ruby or this other programming language that is new, and it'll be very exciting, and it'll take a team of 20 and $1 million in venture capital funding to run. Like, wait a second, what happened to static websites? Like, why can't we just make something fun on the web so that we learn new stuff? Oh, and now you have to be compatible with like 20 versions of Internet Explorer. This is why I like the old GeoCities, because it's static websites. You can do whatever you want. This is like an old Power Rangers fan website. I mean, this person, I bet they're making websites for a living right now. I bet. This person like probably makes like some like archiving tool from Google or something. So what the heck happened? If you own your own data and you learn how to build your own website again, then you can use the social networks for distribution, which is great. And you can help work on web frameworks that are static. What's the actual lifespan of like a dynamic website? It's like 6 months now. And like, what's the point of making a website that's not going to be around for like 14 or 15 years? Like I have stuff running from like 1998. It's awesome, right? Because it's static. It's exciting. You can make something that like grows over time. So why do we need an independent web? I think we need an independent web. Why do we need it? If you're afraid of losing all your photos and files, or your account was frozen and that's attached to your identity, or you had this really great thing that you were a part of on a social network, but all your content got lost due to an acquisition, or there was all these companies profiting off your data, or just the nice feeling of being able to create again without needing a team of 20 to approve everything that you do, or freedom. That's mine. What content to publish, when to publish, what to store over time. You can control your own user experience or make a new one, not the standard one. I mean, remember on the early web, people were experimenting with the weirdest, horrible user interfaces, and then Flash came around and it was even worse, but it was really fun. And I think we need more fun. We've gotten so serious, it sucks. And then you can own your content forever, yay. I don't know why, I like to data hoard, it's fun. But it feels good. This is a reboot of GeoCities called NeoCities. It's a static website host, and you can just make websites. There are some weird websites in here, like there's a Serial Experiments Lane website, and it has like 3 million views. And there's this guy that invented 3JS, and he like releases all of his like weird experiments on it in the browser. Now like there's web VR that you can do on it. Like there's all sorts of weird stuff, but like people are having fun with this community again, and thank goodness. Like we need that again, I think, a lot. I hope you agree and have a good time on the web. I think of it as homesteading. Like it's a home for your data. Your blog becomes creative outlet again, or you don't have to blog, but you can like learn and experiment and be amateur. And then you could also have hyperlinks, because we don't have a lot of indexable hyperlinks anymore because they're all stored on like Twitter and Facebook, and those don't exist anymore. So this like dark age of data could happen in which all this stuff could go away and we don't have anything, except the Library of Congress is apparently archiving all of the tweets. That sounds horrible. They probably have like a stack of just Justin Bieber's tweets, you know, like this tall. It's like, should we keep the Justin Bieber tweets? Should we not? Well, we said we'd archive everything. Thank you very much. I don't know how much time I took, so maybe there's questions available. Questions are available, starting now. I don't know. Wait for the mic. We have to archive everything, right?
Hey, Emma, you said earlier that about the privacy settings, that it was better to ask up front when you install the app, for example. No, you said the other way around, right? You said like whenever the app needs to access data, or your microphone or your camera or something, it would be better to interrupt the user and say, this is a leading question, I think, but you said it was better to interrupt the user and ask them like right there and then if the app could actually use their camera. So it goes somewhat against the user experience rules of like interrupting somebody's workflow, because the user intent is actually to use that app. And if that needs to use the camera, then so be it, right? So I would say it would almost be better to, when you install the app, to say, can we use your camera if we need to? So my question is, what's your opinion about that?
Yeah. Is there any, like, I don't know whether it's true or not, whether it's better or not. I just know that if I have a new phone and I have to redo all the permissions, it's kind of annoying. But I do it once and I'm done and it's fine. But oftentimes I don't want to use all of those pieces of the app. Like if you see somebody like install a new app, hey, you should try this new app, and then they go through and they're like, eek, and they just press like okay, or like they're just like involved with all these things. Oftentimes there's a bunch of dark UX that's bundled in there, which is like allow camera, allow audio, allow notifications and pop-up alerts from our partners, you know, and then you get that. So on a lot of those applications, you end up like getting registered for things that you don't necessarily want. And there's no cut and dry answer to this. You know, some apps maybe you want to have everything up front. Some apps maybe you don't. I guess my preference is that it says it before I share. But in other cases, and of course you could like do it in a switch toggle instead of like a pop-up, and that might be a lot better, and also allow that to be set from within the app instead of the settings on your phone. and then that's up for grabs, right? So there's no cut and dry response. And like however you feel it should be done, do it that way and see what happens. I wish there was an A/B testing for that, where you can be like, this is so annoying, or like, this is really great. And as long as you allow people to change it easily, it should be good. But yeah, thanks for calling me out on that. So thanks.
Yeah, so I wish that I could make this question fun, but it's actually a bit more serious than that. So in Australia, we've just started hearing about all this data sovereignty.
Can you put your microphone in front of your mouth a little bit more?
All right.
Yes.
Is that better?
Yes.
So in Australia, we've just started hearing in the last few kind of weeks about all this data sovereignty kind of legislation and rules and experiments that are starting to be done in Europe at least. And I'm just wondering, that has massive implications for how we design application forms and things like that, because you own your data when you're applying for a bank account, things like that. And I'm just wondering, do you have any perspectives or learnings or thoughts on where things are heading with all that data sovereignty? So basically you owning your data, and when you apply for an application form, basically we say, can we access that data that you own and you manage? So just interested in your thoughts on that, because I think it's a massive potential change to UX design.
Yes. So data sovereignty is exciting if it happens, right? I could say, hooray, if it happens there, that's fantastic. I can't predict anything that will happen in the States anymore after what's happened in the last year. I wish I could, right? So everything kind of went out the window. All my predictions failed, including the stock market. I thought that would go down too. But I think data sovereignty is really important if we can do it. My fear is that it will be done on a country-by-country basis, and some countries will have it set up well, and some countries will have it set up really poorly, and then it'll just be even worse, because if you're applying to live in another country and you're doing something, then you'll have to abide by all those different rules, and it'll be a big mess, and who knows if it will be done well. I'm excited that data sovereignty is happening there. I would love for it to happen more here. Then the other question is if you're owning that data, how are you owning that data? How secure is that data? Who's building that system? Because you're not going to build that system. Is it stored in a server in your house? Is it stored on your phone? Can somebody hack into your phone remotely? Can somebody see, if you're at a coffee shop and it's on some really bad insecure Wi-Fi, can somebody just packet sniff and get all that data out? Would they actually want to or not? These are all these questions that then once it shifts to the customer or the user, whatever you call it, the individual, then what does it mean? Is that safe, and are they responsible for it? We have houses with locks, and sometimes they get hacked into and broken into, and it's pretty easy to pick a lock. But usually if your house gets broken into, they're stealing jewelry and a flat screen TV. They're not trying to steal the deed of your house. But with your information, they would probably be trying to do it. The issue is the good thing about it actually with data sovereignty is you'd have to hack a single account each time, and that would really suck. So it's just making it really tedious. The more tedious and unrewarding we can make it for this personal data to be hacked into, the better. We just need to make it just slightly more annoying so that it'll be so expensive that hackers can't profit off of it. Because right now it's so cheap and easy to do, then it's not a big deal. So hopefully there'll be more rigorous things around that, and hopefully the states and many other places will also adopt that. So I hope to watch what's happening there and see how it works, because that would be really exciting, and hopefully it goes through. So thanks for the note.
Hi, I'm hiding behind a pole there. I've got a quick question and more about user adoption and privacy of new technology. So you mentioned that the Google Glass, was not successful because of all the new technologies that went into it, and there was it was more radical than step-by-step introducing new technologies. Just curious where you see something like virtual reality going into this, and if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, question about virtual reality. Okay, so virtual reality is fantastic because we've had virtual reality attempts before, starting in 1967 with Ivan Sutherland, and then the 80s, and then we had it in the 90s, and each time it cost it was $5 million, and then $500,000, and then $50,000, and now $5,000 or less. And so the good thing about virtual reality is you can have a computer with a good graphics card, have it in your living room, or have it at a lab, and it's a completely controlled environment. So you have your headset on, you have a small space that you can walk around in, and it's getting pretty mature. Like there are maybe 200 games. You can use Unity, you can use Unreal Engine. There's lots of play spaces. It's very fun. And you can control that environment. So unlike, I mean, that will grow, I think, a lot more because you have these controllers. So it makes everybody's hands the same because there's these buttons on it. Whereas if you look at something like augmented reality, like the Meta is really great, or like the HoloLens is difficult to use because the viewer is like this small. Recognizing your hands, like everybody has different hands and hand shapes and sizes and colors, and like your sleeves or whether you're wearing gloves, like there's no real standards. Plus there's object recognition issues, and like if the light is dim or bright, like it won't be able to recognize objects as well. And if it's projecting objects in front of you, like it won't detect that your hand is intersecting with the object. So I think AR has way longer to go. But VR has these kind of standards evolving, which are here are your standard controllers. Here's your intersection. You can turn on or off object intersectionality. So you can like jump on top of stuff. There's teleportation that you can use within it. It's pretty fantastic. So I think VR, its time has finally come because it's fun. And people are playing with it and making games. And there's also porn, which is important, because if you see like porn and gambling in games, you know the thing is going to be okay. And that's how we innovate, right? We're humans. But you don't see that in AR because it's so serious. And like if you look at HoloLens, I apologize if anybody works on it or is from Microsoft, but it's so serious, and like there's this, it's going to be a real serious business tool, and it's going to revolutionize if you have to say that, then it's not going to do it. Sorry. It has a long way to go. It's not that it's bad. There's a lot of technology that goes into it, but like machine vision and machine learning and all these things are just not entirely there yet, because what you're doing is you're mapping on like a perfect mathematical environment to an imperfect world that has different lighting conditions and objects and things like that, where you're not going to have a computer recognize that's a chair, even though there's a chair there, there's also an Eames chair. Is this part of a database of chairs? Can I recognize that this is a chair if I see it at a different angle? Well, in virtual reality, you just program a chair and turn on object intersectionality, and somebody can like jump on top of it. Or they can change the chair, or they can make it larger or smaller with their hands that are the same size hands for everybody because there are these controllers. So it's kind of like on the web, you can create something and people will click, and that's great. But if you're doing something in reality, like reality is just kind of a mess. Like there's way too many edge cases right now. So the question is, I like to see the opposite of like augmented reality. Instead of you wearing a headset and de-democratizing the experience and causing everybody to have to pay $1,000 to see, why don't we just do projected displays, and you can use a laser pointer and like click on things and like change how those work. Like, there's a communication design group, which is Alan Kay's from Xerox PARC's group in San Francisco, and they're doing that. They're just doing, and Worry Dream is doing all these cool projected interfaces. So like you have a projection of a bunch of farm animals on the wall, and you click on them with a laser pointer, and a little pico projector is detecting whether there's a really bright spot in the projection, and then it will like make a sound of like a farm animal. Like they're playing with stuff. It could work. It could be great. So I think VR is good, but AR is not. And I think the other issue is we also have like 3 competing things in VR that are stable. So like we have the PlayStation VR, and we have the Oculus, and we have the Vive. So those are good things. I think we're out of time. So.